5 years after having their idea shut down by Nintendo, Satoshi Tajiri and his friend Ken Sugimori were going to finally release their game that was nearly 10 years in the making.
That's right, and little did they know the impact that his bug collecting idea would have on the world of video games and pop culture as a whole.
Today we take a step back and look at Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue, and what it was that made, well, Red and Blue, as well as what the difference between the two games meant for the series and the world of gaming as a whole. Join us now as we explore the Gen 1 Pokemon games and what it truly meant to sell the same game with just a different colored cartridge.
Pokemon Red and Blue were some of the most influential games of all time.
But Dirks, what about the Pokemon Yellow?
Listen, I think it's more than safe to say that Yellow is, in many regards, a completely different game altogether. So for this video, we won't be comparing it. Anyways, Pokemon Red and Blue were some of the most influential games of all time, having sold well over 9.8 million copies in the US alone, not even including virtual console sales or the re-releases.
With its perfect mixture of fine-tuned battle mechanics and its insanely addictive gotta catch 'em all slogan that rang true throughout its gameplay, there's no surprises that these games have done and continue to do amazingly well.
It's safe to say that the first generation Pokemon games were extremely innovative in a handful of ways, while borrowing some tricks from other well-known places and really honing in on these mechanics and making them unique to the series. Pokemon is an RPG battle game that is slammed to the brim with collectibles.
But what really set Pokemon aside from other games of the time and truly paved the way for games to come was that Game Freak released two games simultaneously that were almost identical but required each other to complete. The gamble would pay off.
I remember the first time hearing about the concept of Red and Blue. Being so young, it kind of confused me, but once I understood this concept, it's exactly what kept me playing.
Right, playing a game where you had to use your buddy in order to catch a Caterpie or Weedle really blew every other game I was playing at the time out of the water.
Me and Kaiser decided it would be fun to go back and play each of our personal favorites for this video. Naturally, I picked Blue.
And I picked the better of the two, Red.
Just for full disclosure, we captured all the footage we could on an emulator in order to supply the highest quality footage we could.
So what do you say? Let's get started.
From the get-go, these games look, play, and feel exactly the same, minus a change in palette. Get it? So why in the world was everyone at the lunch table always fighting over how much better Red was from Blue, or Blue was from Red?
What really set the games apart was the Pokemon available to each respective color. Yeah, we know this already, but looking back on it, you really have to embrace the incredible concept this was.
From a sales perspective, it was an amazing move. I knew kids at school that had their parents buy them one of each color and an extra Game Boy to trade with. I, of course, wasn't that lucky and was forced to beg my peers to trade with me if I wanted something from the other game.
With Blue only selling 5 copies and Red's
Kaiser.
Fine. With Blue selling over 5 million copies and Red coming close behind with 4.8 million, you can see the benefit of having a game released with a copy of itself.
Let's not forget the influx in Game Boy sales and the fact that it practically revived the Game Boy as a console.
That's right. Not only did the games themselves sell very well, but Pokemon was the reason many kids I knew, including myself, owned a Game Boy and a Game Boy Color.
So let's go over the major differences between the games. First off, the exclusive Pokemon to each respective title. I chose Blue, so I'll go first. We have Sandshrew in its evolution, Bellsprout in its line, Vulpix in its evolution, aka the best Pokemon of all time, Ninetales, Magmar, Pinsir, and Meowth.
That's right!
Wow, I forgot that you could only get Ninetales in Blue. So for Red, there is the Vileplume line, Mankey, Primeape, Ekans Arbok, Growlithe with Arcanine, Scyther, and Electabuzz.
The only other notable major difference between Pokemon Red and Blue are the prizes available at the Game Corner located in Celadon City. Among the ones that are available to both games, Red has a Scyther and Nidorino available, having to pay more for every other prize minus Dratini, and Blue has a Pinsir and Nidorino available, and everything being quite a bit cheaper.
Needless to say, these aren't the only differences between the two games, but these are, as far as we found, the only two that directly affect the gameplay.
But Kaiser, you gotta acknowledge that it was these slight differences that set in motion the biggest game movement of all time. It was this new mechanic of needing another copy of the game that created Pokemon as we know it today.
Satoshi Tajiri had decided very early on that this game would make full use of the Game Boy's link cable, and boy did he. Up to this point, the link cable was merely used to play against a friend, but Pokemon introduced the concept of trading as well as a way to compete.
Trading was such a major deal because not only was it required to complete the game through acquiring game-specific Pokemon and evolving others, but it was the first time this had been done. See, up to this point, the link cable was purely used for multiplayer competition, but Pokemon changed that.
The concept of evolution through trade caused players to fight on the playground like cats and dogs. Most of the time, trainers would be reasonable, but there was always that one kid that you would trade your Kadabra to, and then they would just keep your Alakazam instead of trading back.
Hey Kaiser,
Yeah, man.
weren't you a little late to the whole evolution trading thing?
Oh yeah, definitely. But at the time, the internet was still pretty young, and I wasn't allowed to use it as a kid. But I did have this Graveler that for the life of me I couldn't get to evolve, no matter how many missing no rare candies I shoved down its throat.
You know, come to think of it, I guess I can't poke too much fun. The first time I came in contact with evolution trading was at Books A Million. Some kid offered to trade me an Arcanine for my Machoke, and I was more than happy to do so, until I found out he ended up with a Machamp.
Yeah, but see, this is what made trading in Pokemon so amazing. It was an aspect of multiplayer gameplay we had never seen before. With a game like Pokemon, everyone expected to be able to battle, but trading is what really put the series in a league of its own.
Exactly, and it was this concept that allowed Game Freak and Nintendo to essentially sell the same game with a different cover.
The industry learned a lot from Pokemon's success, and not just Nintendo either. There are so many games that took a page out of Pokemon's book.
Oh yeah, like Robopon, a game I have never personally played, but when released in Japan came out with 3 different versions of the same game. The game followed a young boy named Cody who lives on an island and collects battle robots.
Sounds familiar.
But this game included a cool feature called Game Boy Kiss that was an IR sensor built into the cartridge, which allowed you to manipulate the game with IR devices such as TV remotes.
While North America only saw a single version of Robopon, Robopon Sun, we did get both versions of the sequel, Robopon Ring and Robopon Cross. Overall, these games were fairly well received, but to many, both are seen as Pokemon clones.
We also had games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters 4 that was released with 3 different versions of the same game, but you just start with a different deck. And the Mega Man Battle Network series that were the same games, but just had different bosses, enemies, and a handful of other things.
We also saw influences in other places, such as with The Legend of Zelda Seasons and Ages. Though both were very different games, they required each other to get the real ending. The same concept can be found in countless other games across many other consoles, and I think it's safe to say it was all spurred from Pokemon Red and Blue.
Pokemon Blue was the first game that truly got me engaged in video games. Up to that point I had played a ton of Mario Kart and a little bit of Mario Brothers, but I had never truly experienced an RPG. It was the first game that I truly hated to put down, and it was the first game that told me a story.
I got swept up in the whole Pokemon phenomenon like a lot of kids my age. Despite not keeping up with every generation, it got me out of my room and playing with like-minded trainers. Pokemon Red introduced me to a lot of subtle game mechanics that helped me get out of my box, with its multiplayer trading and battling system. Recently I've gotten back into the series, but nothing will beat the nostalgia of the original games that hold a special place in my heart as both a person and a player.
I think it's safe to say that we owe a lot to Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue, and everything that they stand for is a staple in video game history. It's so easy to forget the influence that these games had on pop culture as well as the video game industry. So thank you, Satoshi Tajiri, for taking your crazy bug collecting idea and turning it into one of the most loved and commercially successful video games of all time. Yo, thank you so much for making it to the end of my first video. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and subscribe and throw the video a like. I would greatly appreciate it. Huge shout out to Kaiser, who was pretty much the deciding factor on me actually finishing this video. I also want to shout out Andre over at Time Wallace and Dan over at the Retro World. Both of their links to their YouTube channels will be in the description below. I will have some more gaming content similar to this out very soon, as well as hopefully some music and stuff. I don't know, we'll see where the channel takes me. Anyways, once again, thank you for checking me out.